Welcome to the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today we're going to be talking about element types that you can use with workflows. So what these element types are, and you can find these on your projects menu. These are some different names that you can give elements on the PDF copy that you print. So for example, when I have a quote open in Flex, I could click Generate PDF, and the PDF that gets generated can either say quote on the top, or because I created some new element types, I could have it say estimate, I could have it say order, I could have it say proposal, and I can have that name change based on workflow actions that I execute. So the real world scenario here being I could start a quote, and when I print the PDF, it's called an estimate, and then once I confirm it, I can call it a proposal or a quote or something else. So I'm not actually changing the name of the element inside Flex. All I'm doing is just changing the name that appears at the top of the PDF. So this is really more client-facing, but it proves to be very useful when you set up some of these for different scenarios. So let's go through how to set some up. We'll look at the project element settings. We'll look at workflows. We'll go through all the different settings in order for you to be able to experiment with these and maybe set up some element types in your system. So as you can see, I already have a few element types set up. This was a really easy process. I just went to the projects menu, clicked element types. That gave me my list. Yours will probably be empty. And then just click new element type. In fact, I'm going to create a new one right now called quote because I want to be able to get back to the point where at the top of the PDF I'm calling a quote a quote. You don't really need a code or description. Those are just optional. In fact, I'm not 100% sure where the code would actually be used besides internally in the back end of Flex. And the description could just be additional description for people within your company if they want to be able to see why you created this. But I'll often just leave those blank because usually they're pretty self-explanatory. So I click Create down in the corner. Now when I reload, we have quote as an element type. So I have estimate, order, proposal, quote. Let's see how I can actually use these on my quote element. First, let's just go create a new job, a new quote specifically, because I just want to show you what happens during a normal process when we haven't set up any element types yet. Remember, when you first create an element like a quote, it will begin in an initial status. That's controlled in the project element settings, which we'll look at in just a minute. In those project element settings, you also have the initial element type that this quote or the element can start in. So the status is one thing, but the element type is another thing. We'll look at those settings in just a minute. But like I said, I just want to quickly create a quote. And we're going to print out a PDF just so we can kind of see what the normal process kind of looks like. So I'll just put a random item on there so we can have something on there to print on the PDF. And now when I go to Generate PDF, notice at the top it says quote because this is a quote and I haven't set up any element types yet. But let's say that when I first start a quote and it's still an inquiry, I want to send it out to my client, but I don't necessarily want to call it a quote. Maybe I want to call it an estimate so that they can see that this is just kind of a starting point estimate of what it's going to cost. They can come back and haggle if they want to or add some things. And until it's actually confirmed, we're not going to call it a quote. So let's show how we can set that up with our element types. Again, we already created an element type called estimate. Let me show you where we can use this now. I'm going to go into the projects menu, click project elements. And since we're dealing with a quote right now, I'm going to double click quote. And I'm going to go over to the Status Options tab. Because again, this is where I could choose not only what is the default status that I'm going to create quotes in, but also the default type. So this is going to be your element types. I also just want to make sure that I've permitted all these different element types to be used on a quote. So I'll check all those boxes. And then I want to choose, when I first initially create a quote, what do I want its element type to be? And in this scenario, I want it to be an estimate. So I'll choose those, change those settings and choose that, and then click Update. And now, when I go to create a new quote, this new quote should take on the settings that I just set. So I'm essentially just going to do the same thing, create a test quote, drag and drop an item on there just so I have something to show. And now when I click Generate PDF, notice the difference. Up on the top, it's now called Estimate. This is still a quote. I didn't change anything about the actual quote element inside of Flex. All I did was say, I want this to start in the initial element type of what we called estimate. So now you're probably thinking that's all well and good, but how do I get that to change back? Or how do I get to change that name up on the top to be something else depending on which workflow state and which status the quote is in? So let's show how we can do that. We already showed how to change what the initial element type is, and again, that was on Project Elements. We double click quote because that's what we're working with, and that was all in the Status Options tab. We just chose default type as estimate. But to be able to change that based on workflow or statuses, we want to go to the Projects menu, click Workflow, so this will take us to all of our workflow settings. And again, because we're working with a quote, we're going to double-click Quote Workflow. I'm not going to go over how workflow actually works. If you want to learn more about workflow and how you could set up different states and statuses and workflow actions and all of that, I have a few videos on our YouTube page. It's just youtube.com/flexrental. But I will just give a quick overview of what workflow is. Remember, when I started my quote, that started in the inquiry state or the inquiry status. That's the initial state. But then if I want to jump around to tentative or confirmed or canceled, I need what we call workflow actions to get from state to state. So my workflow actions, and we can see this if we look at a quote and scroll down in the menu over here, my workflow actions are to cancel, confirm, or set to tentative. And if we go back to the quote workflow settings, you could see those are the workflow actions that are set up for inquiry. Let's look at the settings for when we confirm a quote. So I'm just going to click Confirm Quote. This is what happens when I click Confirm Quote on any quote. It goes from the source state of inquiry to the target state of confirmed. And it also sends an outflow job, quote confirmed. That's the email template, that internal email template that we'll send to anybody in your company, letting them know that you confirm the quote. And again, we're not going to look at all these settings. If you want to learn more about these, check out our YouTube page, but we are going to look at change to type. When I click confirm quote, I want it to change from the element type of estimate to something else. And I could probably choose any of these. It just depends on what terminology you like to use and maybe what your customers are used to. But I like to use quote, so I'm just going to switch it back to element type of quote. So again, I'm making this change on the confirm quote workflow action from inquiry. So my quote starts in this state because that's the initial state. But when I click the action to confirm quote, I want it to change back to the element type of quote. So I click Update, and let's go see what happens now. Let's go back to this element type testing 2. When I go down and click Confirm Quote, there's that email template. And again, you're not going to see anything here within Flex that's letting you know that it changed the element type back to quote. The only place that you're ever going to see that is on the PDF that you print. So I click Generate PDF, and now it's coming back as quote because I confirmed the quote and it changed the element type back. So I've seen some customers do some pretty creative things with these element types. They might start their quote. Where's my project? Here we go. They might start their quote like we did in the initial state or status of inquiry, but then the element type of estimate. And then maybe when they click tentative, so on the quote workflow, set to tentative, they might say, if I set to tentative, I want it to change to proposal. But then from tentative, if they click confirm quote, then they want it to change back to saying quote at the top. And so you could go through several different layers of these element types so that you could change the name that appears at the top of your PDF printout. Let's look at another scenario of how you can use these element types, and we'll start from the very beginning because we don't have some of these element types created yet. So let me close all my other tabs. And again, if you came in late, we just go to the Projects menu, click Element Types, and these are all of our element types. The scenario for this example is when you create a PO and you send the PDF out to your vendor, you might want the top corner to show something different than saying rental PO or purchase PO. Maybe you want it to be called request for pricing. And then once you've confirmed that PO, then you can change the name back to rental PO or something like that. So let's go and create a new element type that we will call request for pricing. Click Create. And now I want to go to Projects menu, Project Elements, because we need to change the settings for our PO now. And let's say that we're doing this with our rental PO. So I'll go to Status Options. First thing I want to do is enable which element type options I want to be permitted for a rental PO, and I don't really need these ones, so I'm just going to enable request for pricing. And the default type I want to be request for pricing. I'm not going to mess with the default status or default state or anything. All I'm doing now is saying that the default element type is called request for pricing. So that now when I go to create a new rental PO, again, it's still going to stay in the PO tentative initial status. But when I go to generate the PDF, of course I should probably put something on there first. And I could either put what I think their default cost might be or just leave that at 0 because again, I'm just sending this out as a request for pricing. So here you can see my rental PO. Because I set that up as the default element type, that's what it says up in the top right corner. But again, once I've confirmed this, so first let's submit it for approval, so that our next step would be to approve or confirm. I need to set up in this workflow action a way to get back to an element type that's called PO. So let's go to our Projects menu, click Workflow. And this is an interesting one because right now my PO workflow is using the same workflow for both rental POs and purchase POs. So if I want to be able to go to this rental PO and click approve PO and have it turned back to an element type called rental PO, then I might have to set up an additional workflow action that's called approve rental PO as opposed to approve purchase PO. And let's do that really quick. So right now we're in the submitted for approval status or state. I want to create a new workflow action that's specific to approving rental POs. I don't necessarily need a confirm screen. The source state is PO submitted for approval because that's where I want this workflow action to be available from. The target state is going to be PO approved, which is probably tied to the PO confirmed status. And then I want to change it to a type. I haven't created that element type yet. So for now, let's just click create. Close that down and go back to our projects menu to create that new element type that we're just going to call rental PO. So we go back to our PO workflow and let's refresh it, because now we have the approve rental PO action. And keep in mind, it's doing pretty much the exact same thing that just the normal approve PO is doing. All we're doing is just giving a specific workflow action that changes the type back to rental PO. I could very well go back to my projects, element types, and create a new element type that's called purchase PO. Go back to my PO workflow, and in the old approve PO workflow action, I can now call this approve purchase PO and have this change back to the element type of purchase PO. See what I'm doing there? So now I have two separate actions in my PO workflow. One to approve a rental PO that will just change it to the element type of rental PO. So again, the top corner will just read rental PO now instead of request for pricing. And then my other one, approve purchase PO, is just going to change the element type back to purchase PO. Both of them are going into the same state. They'll go into the same status. All we did there was just create separate workflow actions to change the element type. So let's go back to our mic rental. We'll have to reload it so that we can see those new workflow actions. And since this is a rental PO, I'll click approve rental PO, and now when I click generate PDF, that element type switched back to rental PO, so it no longer says request for pricing. So that's what element types are, just as a quick review of what we did here. On the projects menu, you click element types, and that's where you can set up the different names of element types. And remember, whatever you name them here, that's what's going to show up on the PDF printout of whatever element. Then we also went into project elements, and for example, we double click quote, went to the status options tab, and that's where we changed the default type. So when I initially create a new quote, the element type is going to be called estimate. So when I click generate PDF, it's going to say estimate up in the top right corner. And then we went to workflow. We opened the workflow we were dealing with, so quote workflow, for example. And anywhere that we would want to change that element type name back to quote, or if we wanted to change it to proposal or whatever, we would just click the workflow action. So from the inquiry state, if I click confirm quote, we have it set to change to type back to quote. So the top right corner of the PDF will start saying quote again. I just want to stress again that when you are doing these element types and changing to type, all you're really doing is just changing what name appears at the top right of the PDF. You're not changing what these actual elements are within the system. It's still going to be a quote 100% of the time. It's still going to be a rental PO 100% of the time within Flex. You're just changing the name on the PDF. So if you want some more information about these element types, maybe see what some of our other customers have been doing, you can always go to our forum. That's just forum.flexrentalsolutions.com. We have a very active and vibrant community of Flex users there, so you can ask for suggestions of what people are doing with element types. And a lot of times Flex employees like our CEO Chris and our support staff are in there too to give some suggestions. If you have any technical issues that are coming up with these element types, then you can email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.